I was wearing the blue dress I'd bought 3 months before, the one my husband always said made my eyes look like the ocean, even though he'd been gone for 6 years, and I still bought things sometimes thinking of what he would have said. My son was getting married in 4 hours. I had the flowers arranged, the caterer confirmed, the seating chart memorized. I had a speech folded inside my clutch that I'd rewritten 7 times. I was ready. I told myself I was ready. Our neighbor Gwen had come over that morning to help me get the clasp on my necklace. Her fingers are steadier than mine since my arthritis started acting up last fall, and she'd stayed to have coffee and make sure I ate something before the chaos began. That was Gwen. She'd lived next door for 23 years. She'd brought casseroles when my husband died. She'd sat with me on the back porch the night I found out my son had gotten engaged, and I cried, not because I was unhappy, but because I was so relieved he'd found someone to love him the way I'd always hoped. She had met my future daughter-in-law a handful of times. She'd been polite. I remembered later that Gwen had always been polite about her, and I had not known, until that morning, what that politeness was covering. I was upstairs finishing my makeup when Gwen called up to me from the hallway, her voice low, sharper than usual. "Can you come down here?" I thought she'd spilled the coffee. I came downstairs holding a mascara wand. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and her face was wrong. I don't know how else to say it. Her face was wrong in the way a face gets wrong when a person knows something they don't want to know. She took my arm and pulled me into the little sitting room off the entryway, the one nobody ever uses, and she closed the door behind us. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to be calm," she said. "Gwen, I was coming back from the bathroom," she said. "I walked past the kitchen and your son and that woman were in there. They're here?" My son wasn't supposed to arrive until noon. It was 9:30. They came early. He wanted to pick something up, I think. I don't know. But they were in the kitchen, and the door wasn't all the way closed, and She stopped. She looked at the floor and then back at me. I heard them. I remember the mascara wand in my hand. I remember thinking very clearly, "Put that down." I set it on the side table. "What did you hear?" She told me. "My daughter-in-law's name is Sayursay. She's 34. She has a degree from a school I'd never heard of, and she works in marketing, which means, as far as I can tell, that she sends emails and attends meetings, and occasionally produces something called a deck, which is not a deck, it's a presentation. My son has told me this several times, and I still find it amusing. I'm 67 years old, and I come from a time when decks were wood and attached to houses. I had tried very to like Sayers. I want to be honest about that. I had tried, and I had found her difficult to like, and I had blamed myself for it. I thought it was grief. My husband had been gone 6 years, and I had been the only family my son had for a long time, and I thought maybe I was one of those mothers who couldn't let go. I had read articles about it. I had prayed about it. I had told myself that what mattered was that my son was happy, and he seemed happy, and that should be enough. Sayursay had never been unkind to my face. That was the thing. She'd always smiled and called me by my first name and asked about my garden. She'd sent me a birthday card last year with a handwritten note that said she was grateful to be joining our family. I had put it on the refrigerator. I had cried a little bit, in a good way. I had wanted so badly to be wrong about her. What Gwen had heard, standing in the hallway with the door not all the way closed, was this: my son asking his fiancée if she had talked to the attorney yet. His fiancée saying yes, she had talked to him, and it was more complicated than they'd thought, but not impossible. My son asking, "How long does something like that take?" Her saying, "It depends on how cooperative she is. If she just agrees to it, it could be done in a few months. If she fights it, it could be a year, maybe more." My son saying, "She's not going to fight it. She trusts me completely." And my daughter-in-law, the woman who was going to marry my son in 4 hours, saying, "That's the part that makes me feel a little guilty." And my son saying, "Don't." I stood in that little sitting room and I felt something drain out of me, the way heat leaves a room when you open a window in January. I was cold very suddenly. I sat down on the love seat that nobody ever sits on. The house, I said. Gwen nodded. Of course it was the house. My husband and I bought this house in 1987. We paid $83,000 for it, which was a stretch even then, and we painted every room ourselves over 2 weekends, and we raised our son in it, and my husband died in the bedroom upstairs with the window open, because he liked to hear the birds. The house is worth considerably more than $83,000 now. Property values in this part of the state have done what property values do, and my husband had the foresight to pay it off entirely before he got sick. And when he passed, it came to me free and clear. It is the most valuable thing I own. It is where I live. About a year before my son got engaged, he had come to me with what he called a financial planning conversation. He'd sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and he'd explained very gently that there were tax advantages to transferring the property into a joint trust, that it would simplify things when I eventually passed, that his attorney had looked it over, and it made a great deal of sense. I had said I would think about it. I had thought about it for 3 months, and then I had said I wasn't ready to make that decision, and my son had said he understood, and we had not spoken about it again. I understood now why it had come back up. More complicated than they'd thought, but not impossible. The attorney, cooperative, trusts me completely. I sat on the love seat in the sitting room, and I thought about my husband, who had loved this house, who had believed, as I had believed, that we were building something that would outlast us in the right ways. Not taken, not maneuvered out from under us. Given, when the time was right, freely. I thought about the birthday card on my refrigerator. Gwen sat beside me, and she held my hand, and she didn't say anything, which is one of the reasons I have loved her for 23 years. She knows when not to talk. After a while, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I didn't know." She said, "Is there someone you trust?" Legally, I mean. There was. My attorney, not the one my son had mentioned, not whoever he'd been talking to, but mine, a woman I'd been working with for 12 years, who had helped me settle my husband's estate and who called me every December to wish me a Merry Christmas. Her name is not Patricia. Her name is Harriet, and she is 70 years old and sharp as a blade, and I knew she would pick up the phone on a Saturday if I called. "I'm going to make a call," I said. "Okay, and then I'm going to get in the car, and I'm going to watch my son get married, because I am not going to let this ruin that for me." Gwen looked at me for a long moment. "You're a strong woman," she said. I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was holding myself together with both hands. I called Harriet from the upstairs bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub, still in the blue dress. I told her what Gwen had heard as clearly and calmly as I could. I told her about the conversation my son had brought to me a year ago, the joint trust, the tax advantages. I told her I had never signed anything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. When this is over, after the wedding, after you've had a few days, I want you to come in. We're going to do a proper estate plan, a revocable living trust in your name, you as the sole trustee. Nobody gets access to that property without your explicit, witnessed consent. Not your son, not his wife, not anybody. Can we do that?" "We've been able to do that the entire time," she said. "I should have pushed you harder to do it sooner. That's on me. You didn't know. No, but I know now." She paused. "Are you all right?" I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, the blue dress, the necklace Gwen had clasped. "My husband's eyes," he used to say. "I'll be all right," I said. "I just need to get through today." I got through the ceremony. I watched my son say his vows and I cried, because he was still my son. He is still the boy who came home from first grade every day and told me everything that had happened, every single thing, the fights and the jokes, and who had said what at lunch. He is still the person I love most in this world. That doesn't go away because someone you love is capable of disappointing you. If it did, there wouldn't be much love left in the world at all. Circe was beautiful in her dress. I will say that. She was beautiful, and she looked at my son like he was something precious, and I watched her very, I watched her very carefully all day, looking for something to tell me I'd misunderstood, that Gwen had misheard, that there was some other explanation for the conversation in my kitchen. I couldn't find one. At the reception, she hugged me and said, "I'm so happy you're my family now." And I said, "Me too, sweetheart." Because I was raised in a house where you did not make a scene at someone's wedding. My mother would have haunted me from the grave. Gwen caught my eye across the reception hall and gave me the smallest nod. I gave her one back. 3 weeks after the wedding, I sat down with Harriet in her office with the good carpet and the window that overlooks the park. She explained it all to me slowly, the way she always does, making sure I understood every word before we moved to the next one. The revocable living trust. The successor trustee. Harriet's firm, not my son. The fact that my home would pass to my son eventually, because I did want him to have it, because I love him, but on a timeline and under terms that I controlled. No transfers possible without my authorizations while I was living. No quiet conversations with outside attorneys. No more complicated than they'd thought, but not impossible. I signed the documents. Harriet had them witnessed and notarized in the same afternoon. When I drove home, I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before I went. Inside, the maples in the front yard were turning. My husband had planted those trees the year we moved in. They were taller than the house now, I thought. This is mine. This is still mine. I did not tell my son right away. I spent some time thinking about whether I would tell him at all, and how, and whether I would tell him what I knew. In the end, I chose honesty because I am 67 years old and I am too tired for games. He came for dinner on a Sunday alone. His wife was visiting friends in another city. I made pot roast because it was his favorite since he was 12, and I was not above using that. After dinner, while the dishes were soaking, I sat across from him at the kitchen table, and I told him. I told him what Gwen had heard. He went very still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I said, "I know about the conversation. I know about the attorney. I know you believe I trust you completely, and I do. I have for 38 years, and I need you to understand what it felt like to learn that that trust was something you were planning around, rather than protecting." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom." And then he didn't say anything else for a while. Here is what I know about my son, and what I knew in that kitchen, watching his face. He is not a bad person. I have to believe that. And I also have to believe it because I think it's true. He is a person who loves someone and has allowed that person to expand his understanding of what he's allowed to want. He told me that Sayorsei had been the one to bring up the house, that she'd found some article somewhere about estate planning and inheritance and had started asking questions, and that the questions had led to a conversation with an attorney, and that he had told himself it was just information gathering, just being prepared, just responsible. He said, "I told myself it wasn't a big deal." I said, "I know you did." He said, "I should have talked to you." I said, "Yes." He cried a little then. My son is not a man who cries easily. He got that from his father, who I only saw cry 3 times in 41 years. It is not a comfortable thing to watch. I let him cry. Then I told him about the trust. I told him that the house was still going to be his someday, that I wasn't cutting him out, that I wasn't punishing him, but that things were going to be handled properly and legally and transparently from here on out, and that any future conversations about my estate would happen in Harriet's office, with Harriet present, with everyone's name on a document. He said, "That's fair." I said, "I know it is." The harder conversation was with my daughter-in-law. She came to the house 2 weeks after my conversation with my son. I suspect he had told her something. She knocked on the door like she was unsure I would open it, which I think showed more self-awareness than she'd demonstrated before. I made tea. I am from a generation that makes tea. I sat her down at the kitchen table and I said what I needed to say. I said, "I heard what you and my son discussed before the wedding. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I've handled my affairs appropriately, and that conversation is no longer relevant. But I need you to understand that I know it happened. And I need you to understand that the relationship you and I are going to have going forward depends on what you do with that information. She looked at the table for a long time. Then she looked up and said, "I didn't think about how it would feel to you." I was thinking about security. I kept thinking, what if something happens and we're not prepared? What if she stopped. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It's not." "I'm sorry," she said. "I am actually sorry." I looked at her. I thought about the birthday card. I thought about the way she'd looked at my son during the ceremony. I thought about the fact that she was sitting across from me saying the words, not making excuses, not crying, just saying it plainly. "I don't need you to be perfect," I said finally. "I need you to be honest. Can you be honest with me?" She said yes, I said. "Then we can figure out the rest." Gwen came over that evening. I poured wine. We sat on the back porch where I'd cried 6 years ago when I found out about the engagement, and I told her everything. She listened. She did not say "I told you so," because she is not that kind of person. When I finished, she swirled the wine in her glass and said, "So, what happens now?" I thought about that. "I think she meant it," I said. "The apology. I don't know. I could be wrong. You're usually not wrong about people." "I was wrong about her." "You were wrong about one thing about her," Gwen said. "Maybe she's more than that one thing." That struck me as wise. That struck me as the kind of thing you can only say after 23 years of watching someone else's life and knowing when to sit quietly and when to say the right sentence. "I'm leaving the house to my son," I said. "I decided that clearly. But Gwen, I want you to know that I'm leaving you something too. I talked to Harriet about it. For everything you did that morning. For everything you've done for 23 years. She started to wave her hand. I stopped her. "It's already done," I said. "It's in the documents. Don't argue with me." She laughed, a little startled. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't." We sat on the porch until it got dark. The maples were fully gold by then. My husband's trees, my house, my life, still mine, still intact. Protected not by suspicion but by clarity, and by the kind of love that shows up on a Saturday morning and pulls you into a sitting room and tells you the truth even when the truth is hard. I am 67 years old. I have buried my husband and settled his estate and raised a son and planted a garden, and I have learned, slowly, the way you learn things slowly at this age, that the people who deserve your trust are not always the people you expect. Sometimes they're the ones who've been next door for 23 years, waiting to be needed.